Hello, HHT community, and welcome to our latest webinar. Thank you for attending an informative session on an HHT clinical trial. My name is Nicole Schaefer, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at Cure HHT, and I will be moderating tonight's session. Tonight, we have the opportunity to learn about the latest clinical trial happening with HHT, understand more about the drug, what's involved, and to ask your questions directly to the expert. But before we jump in, I want to make sure you're aware of some important news and announcements. First, we are very excited to share that we have started registration for the 2025 National Patient and Physician Conference. It will be held in Dallas, Texas on November 8th through the 9th. This conference is more than just a series of sessions. It's an event dedicated to uniting patients, families, and physicians. For 2 days, the HHT community will come together to learn, share, and collaborate. There is a simple, no better way to learn about the latest in HHT care than by attending one of these conferences. But don't wait. Consider registering today before early bird prices expire. For any questions, please email conference@curehht.org. I also wanted to remind you about 2 ongoing programs here at Cure HHT, both aimed to help change the trajectory of this disease. The first is HHT Connect, the first ever global HHT patient registry. Our goal is simple: to collect health information from as many HHT patients as possible so that researchers and doctors can discover patterns and clues that can help them better understand HHT and develop new treatments. By answering a handful of simple questions, you can help advance HHT research, all from the comfort of your own home. I would strongly encourage everyone to visit our website, learn more, and sign up. Our next program, CHORUS, the Comprehensive HHT Outcomes Registry of the United States, is an observational registry of patients diagnosed with hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, known as HHT. The purpose of this study is to better understand HHT, the symptoms and complications it causes, and the impact the disease has on people's lives. The investigators will collect long-term information about the participant, allowing us to understand how the disease changes over time and what effects can influence those changes. Ultimately, this should help improve treatments for this disease. Many HHT centers of excellence in various regions of the United States are now recruiting patients to participate in the study. You can learn more about this study on our website. Finally, before we get underway, I want to go over some housekeeping rules for the webinar to make this event as interactive as possible. First, if you have any questions for the presenter, please type it into the Q&A box to the right of your screen. We recommend that you keep your questions general in nature so that they benefit everyone. I'll ask as many questions as time allows. We will post resources relevant to tonight's topic in the chat box. You can use the chat to make comments to either an individual or to all participants on the webinar. But please do not post questions for the presenters in the chat box. All questions should be typed into the Q&A box. And finally, this presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be saved in the Cure HHT website resource library. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Hanny Al-Samkari is the Peggy S. Blitz Endowed Chair in Hematology Oncology at the Massachusetts General Hospital and Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He is a hematologist and a National Institutes of Health funded clinical investigator and clinical trialist. He also serves as co-director of the MGH HHT Center of Excellence. As a specialist and clinical trialist in bleeding and clotting disorders with a focus on HHT, Dr. Al-Samkari has devoted his career to developing new safe and highly effective therapies for HHT. At the end of this presentation, we will hold a 30-minute moderated Q&A session. Welcome, Dr. Al-Samkari.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Cure HHT, for having this session and for inviting me to speak. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen, Nicole? My slideshow view?
Yes, we can see this.
Perfect. All right, so hi everyone. So again, today we're here to talk about a new clinical trial that's going to be opening for patients with HHT. This is a clinical trial of a medication called ALN 6400 for HHT, and I'll tell you all about it. Here are my disclosures. So I know most of you in the audience already know all of this, so bear with me, but I always have a little bit of an introduction to the disease. So HHT, as we know, is a serious inherited bleeding disorder. This is a progressive multi-system bleeding disorder, meaning multiple different parts of the body and organ systems are involved, and progressive means it gets worse over time as we age due to abnormal blood vessel formation. All right, so there are these abnormal lesions, so-called telangiectasias or arteriovenous malformations that form in the intestines, in the nose, and potentially in other areas in the skin or mucous membranes that cause bleeding. And primarily there's lots of nose bleeding and chronic gastrointestinal bleeding, bleeding from the stomach, bleeding from the small intestine, bleeding from the large intestine. And these things lead to significantly reduced quality of life, as all of the patients will attest, and rather substantial iron deficiency anemia in many cases that may require intravenous iron, may require red blood cell transfusions. And of course, HHT results in arteriovenous malformations inside solid organs like lung, liver, and brain that result in their own problems. When we ask patients with HHT in large survey studies, patients rank bleeding as the most important clinical manifestation by a rather wide margin, AVMs as second, and anemia as third. And we know that there's no therapies worldwide approved for HHT, but certainly nothing in the US from the FDA, nothing from Health Canada in Canada, no European medicine agencies associated or approved medications to date. Want to change that, obviously. So HHT is, some people don't realize, the second most common inherited bleeding disorder. So for the patients out there with HHT, you are not alone. There are 80,000 people in America with HHT, and there are 1.6 million people worldwide with HHT. And this affects men and women equally, unlike hemophilia, which is actually the third most common inherited bleeding disorder. The most common is a disease called von Willebrand disease, which is usually more mild. But for every man with hemophilia, there's a woman and a man with HHT, and the bleeding and the arteriovenous malformation complications result in reduced quality of life, and people with HHT may have reduced lifespans compared with the general population, depending on their disease severity. So how do we treat bleeding in HHT in 2025? Well, everybody should have a nasal moisturization regimen, which I'm sure all the patients have heard ad nauseum from their doctors. It's critical to manage iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia. Everybody needs to have their iron status and their blood counts monitored and have receive all the support they need to achieve a normal hemoglobin if possible, and if not possible, to do as good as possible with aggressive intravenous iron and or red blood cell transfusions. For people, those are kind of two separate pillars. For people that are having acute unstable bleeding, if your blood is absolutely gushing from your nose, you can't get it to stop, or you've had a serious, very quick gastrointestinal bleed and it's caused severe fatigue from the anemia and you have to go into the emergency room. If you go into the emergency room, there's intravenous medications that can be tried, antifibrinolytic drugs like tranexamic acid and aminocaproic acid, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. Many of the patients may have taken those medications by pill form or received them intravenously in the hospital. And procedures, if we can't get the bleeding to stop with those intravenous antifibrinolytic medications, nasal packing, other measures. But when we're talking about in the outpatient setting, we've really moved away from repeat nasal cauteries, repeat laser procedures, repeat, what we call local ablative procedures in the nose and also in the intestines, because we recognize now with this disease that every time we do we cause tissue injury, which is necessarily part of cauterizing or lasering or any of these interventions, right? Any of these surgical or procedural interventions, we actually encourage more telangiectasia growth and formation. And so the a paradigm of treatment in HHT has really moved away from that and moved toward using medications to manage bleeding as best we can. And so if a person has mild or moderate bleeding in HHT, then we think typically the first line therapy is to use these, again, oral antifibrinolytic medications. It's kind of a big word, a very medical word. Antifibrinolytic means reduction of blood clot breakdown. So medications that try to reduce the breakdown of blood clots and therefore prevent bleeding from recurring and reducing the severity of bleeding when it does occur. And this is through medications, which are pills. And for those of you that have taken these pills, these pills are not small. They're pretty large pills, but tranexamic acid, which is the brand name Lysteta, and aminocaproic acid, which is brand name Amicar. And these are medications that are taken in 2 to 3 divided daily doses for tranexamic acid, 3 to 4 divided daily doses for aminocaproic acid. So a lot of pills, 6 to 8 pills a day. And the reason why is that they only last for a few hours after you take them, so you have to keep taking them. And on the other end, if you have more moderate to severe bleeding, then the first step is really, if one is available and your doctor thinks it's a good choice for you, an optimal choice for you, would be a clinical trial of a novel agent. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, would be a clinical trial. And there are other options like bevacizumab or Avastin or pomalidomide or Pomalyst. And those are all things that, again, you can talk over with your doctor regarding whether or not they're good or not so good choices for you. So inhibiting plasminogen, which is a protein that is inhibited by these antifibrinolytic drugs, tranexamic acid and aminocaproic acid. And just for simplicity's sake, those two drugs are very similar, but most of the data in HHT is in tranexamic acid, and the prior studies are with tranexamic acid. So we're just going to focus on tranexamic acid. And because that's a long word, we're just going to say TXA, but it's tranexamic acid for short. So inhibiting this protein called plasminogen, or PLG, in the blood with TXA, we know reduces bleeding. All right. So this is a protein, PLG or plasminogen, is a protein that's made by the liver. And when plasminogen is converted to its active form, which is called plasmin, it helps to break down blood clots. That's a process called fibrinolysis. Okay. Fibrin is a component of blood clots. It's a part of the blood clot matrix. So lysis means breakdown, and you're breaking down fibrin. Tranexamic acid is a drug that binds to plasminogen and inhibits the conversion of plasminogen, which is inactive and doesn't break down blood clots, into plasmin. Okay, so this prevents the protein from being activated using tranexamic acid. This results in a delayed clot breakdown, which we refer to medically as an antifibrinolytic effect. And we know that reduces bleeding. So tranexamic acid is actually FDA approved to treat heavy menstrual bleeding in women. And we use it off-label in all sorts of bleeding disorders. Probably used the most in HHT, but it's used in hemophilia. It's used in von Willebrand disease, used in platelet problems. We use a lot of this drug. And we recognize that it's not the most convenient drug in the world. It's 2 large pills that, again, you take every 6 to 8 hours. And this figure is a representation of the levels of tranexamic acid in the blood every time you take a pill. And so, the ideal levels of this medication, in order to really improve bleeding optimally, is shown as the red line on this graph. And you can see that even if you're taking it exactly as prescribed every 6 to 8 hours, like clockwork, much of the time you're still not at that optimal level, perhaps around half the time, even if you take it optimally. And that's just due to the limitations of this medication, and the body quickly metabolizes it and gets rid of it. And so you see that there's a lot of opportunity for what we would call subtherapeutic levels, and that could and often does lead to worsened bleeding, breakthrough nosebleeds, breakthrough GI bleeding. And so it's certainly it's what we would call a legacy medication. It's a medicine that we've had around for many decades, but it is not optimal just on the basis of how it's taken and how quickly the body gets rid of it. So I'm going to go back to why talking about tranexamic acid is important. But first, just very briefly, I want to bring everyone up to speed on clinical trials. I'm sure some of you in the audience have participated in a clinical trial before, and I'm sure others have not participated in a clinical trial before. Clinical trials are research studies that are designed to try to find answers to specific health questions. Oh, excuse me. A plan for how that research is to be done, called a protocol, defines exactly how the clinical trial is to be conducted. Those protocols are written and designed by clinical trialists and the sponsors of the clinical trial, who fund the clinical trial, who often make the medication or supply the medication to be involved in the clinical trial. And those are reviewed by government regulators and ethics boards extremely closely. Every single word in that protocol is really heavily scrutinized to ensure that it is appropriate, to ensure that the people participating in the clinical trial are not being exposed to any undue risk, to make the clinical trial as safe as possible, and to ideally help it answer the question that it's trying to answer about the medication being tested as accurately and appropriately as possible. Before participating in a clinical trial, patients sign what's called informed consent forms, or ICFs. These are documents that that basically summarize the reasons for the trial, the major potential risks and benefits of the trial, what the trial will entail, everything before you participate. Now, I think it's important to always point out that all participation in clinical trials is totally voluntary, right? So, when I take care of patients in my clinic, my number one focus is the health of my patient. My number two focus is the health of my patient. My number three focus is the health of my patient. Okay. After that, then I have some, obviously we want to advance the science. We want to make things better for everybody with HHT currently suffering from it. We want to make things better for people in the future, for the children of the current people with HHT, for future generations, so on and so forth. And obviously, that's an important aspect of running clinical trials. But I and other doctors that run these clinical trials, right, we offer these clinical trials to people who we think will benefit from them. And the secondary, a secondary benefit is advancing the science. So there are three different phases of clinical trials. Phase one is the first time a medication is tested in people. Okay, and the primary reason to do a phase one trial is to understand safety and tolerability. A phase two trial is a larger study in people who have the disease. Phase one can be done in healthy volunteers or people who have the disease, often done in healthy volunteers. Phase two is done in people with the disease to further define safety, identify the best dose, and assess for potential benefits for patients. That's called efficacy. Okay. And then phase three is a large study that's ultimately meant to prove the efficacy or effectiveness of a medication, and also gain additional insights as to its safety. And this allows the medication, when a medication has succeeded through a phase 3 study, it usually allows it to get approved by regulatory agencies like the FDA. So what should patients consider when thinking about joining a clinical trial? Clinical trials offer patients and providers treatment options that are otherwise unavailable, right? They offer the state of the art. They offer new options that you can't just be prescribed. And those new options may not be prescribed, may not be prescribable for many years, right? Because it takes a long time for drugs to get developed, and it takes a long time for medications to get approved by regulatory agencies. Randomized clinical trials are thought to be the best and safest way to test possible new therapies. We want to understand, is this new therapy better than what we're currently doing? In the case of HHT, because there is no FDA-approved therapy, most HHT studies are randomized to the medication. You can be randomized to the medication or to receive a placebo, which is a medicine or a pill that does nothing. Study protocols are designed to prioritize the safety of the participants. Every single person in a clinical trial is being monitored very closely by the clinical trial staff. And then the ethics board, which is comprised of scientists and patients and regulatory experts, they are also monitoring the trial to make sure that anytime there's any problem that happens, any concerning side effect that happens, that gets reported to that board. And they're making sure that there isn't, problematic trends or, anything that would really compromise the safety. So and when there's a doubt or a concern, trials are often held for that reason. So just to be clear, even though people who participate in clinical trials they're not exposed to that interaction, that is all happening in the background to ensure that everyone is kept safe. All participants in clinical trials who can leave the trial at any time and for any reason or no reason at all. Okay, to emphasize, people are volunteers. When I enroll my patients in the trials, I want to help them. I want to make their disease better in ways that I can't do outside of the trial. I want to give them the opportunity to benefit from a new medication. And if that is not happening in a way that is problematic for the patient, if the patient really has a new shift in their life that makes being in the clinical trial not as feasible as it was before, right? People can leave trials at any time. So signing a consent form does not lock anyone into anything. Patients in a clinical trial get support to navigate the study process and participate in the trial. For example, and this is certainly true at my hospital, patients are maybe assigned research coordinator for logistics and a research nurse for medical questions or issues. So every single patient that gets enrolled in a HHT drug trial at our center, right, is assigned a research coordinator and a research nurse. They're given their direct lines. They can call them anytime that they need help with the trial logistics, or they have a new symptom, or they're starting a new medication, or they just have a question. More staff and hospital resources are often dedicated to the care of clinical trial patients than any other patients. That is absolutely true in every situation I've seen. It's really, I sometimes like to joke that, patients that enroll in clinical trials are VIPs in that way, because they just have a lot more people looking after them because they're on the clinical trial. While clinical trials usually come with a chance of receiving a placebo, which is a treatment that does not cause direct health effects on the body, for a period of time, that's called the randomized portion of the study. Studies may have an open label extension, which and could give access to the drug to everyone at some point. So I am, as a person who, helps design clinical trials, designs clinical trials, and offers clinical trials to my patients, I'm a firm advocate for the open label extension. I want people, irrespective of what you get assigned up front as your treatment, I want you to have the option to, get the novel treatment, the new treatment, even if you go through a period of placebo. Okay, and I think it's really important, as much as possible and whenever possible, for that to be the case with clinical trials. So deciding whether to participate in the clinical trial is a personal choice. It may be right for you, it may not be right for you. I would advise everyone to talk with their healthcare provider, family, and others that they trust, and ask questions to make the decision that's best for you. So let's talk about ALN-6400, which is the medication that is being evaluated in this clinical trial that I'm going to tell you about. So ALN-6400 is an investigational product that is designed to produce production of that protein called plasminogen. Okay, so tranexamic acid inhibits plasminogen activation to the active form, which is called plasmin. ALN-6400 is designed to reduce the production of plasminogen in the first place. So you have less plasminogen around, and if you have less plasminogen around, less will be converted into plasmin. So ALN-6400 works through a natural process called RNA interference, or RNAi. It's given as a subcutaneous injection once every 3 months, and it's being tested in a clinical trial sponsored by Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. ALN-6400 may reduce liver-produced plasminogen, or PLG, by using a natural process, okay, called RNA interference. This is a process that normally happens in the body, and it reduces the production of proteins. And what happens with when you use an RNA therapeutic like ALN-6400 is that you administer this protein into the body that goes, in this case, into the liver, right? And it tells the liver, make less of this protein that, plasminogen in this case, that is problematic in people who have HHT because it causes excessive bleeding, causes more bleeding because people with HHT they don't have normal blood vessels at their various, or in the various organs and various mucosal sites, like in the nose and in the intestines. ALN-6400 is not gene therapy. There's a very big difference between RNA and DNA, just to be very clear. After injection, the ALN-6400 goes to the liver, reduces the production of plasminogen, and the effect is entirely reversible. So when the drug wears off, the plasminogen protein slowly goes back up again, and then eventually back up to where it was before. So the hypothesis being tested in this study is that ALN-6400 will lower plasminogen levels in the blood and reduce bleeding. ALN-6400 may reduce plasminogen produced in the liver and therefore lower plasminogen levels in the blood. One subcutaneous injection may result in a plasminogen lowering effect lasting for weeks to months. This effect is reversible, as I said, when the drug wears off. If you don't continue to receive the injections, the levels are expected to slowly return to normal. And the clinical studies are designed to investigate if lowering plasminogen in this way delays clot breakdown and therefore reduces bleeding. Again, I discussed the plasminogen pathway when I talked about tranexamic acid, right? And so tranexamic acid is pills that inhibit plasminogen, and they cause that up and down, levels, as I showed you in the figure, because you have to take them every few hours. And this medication would lower that protein level, and it would only be in the hypothesis that lowers that protein level and therefore reduces bleeding, and would only need to be given as a subcutaneous injection once every 3 months. So ALN-6400 is currently in a phase 1 trial ongoing in healthy volunteers and will begin in a phase 2 trial soon in people with HHT. And again, the main objective is of the phase 1 study, this is the phase 1 study here, the main objective of the phase 1 study is to evaluate the safety and tolerability of single doses of ALN-6400. And this is happening again in people without HHT, healthy volunteers. And this is a trial in which everybody takes oral tranexamic acid, or TXA, for a period of time, and then they wait for the drug to clear out of their body before switching to either ALN-6400 or placebo, all right? And they get a single dose of ALN-6400 or placebo. This is the phase 1 study undergoing in healthy volunteers, okay? The phase 2 in HHT is different. This study helps to define what dose is ideal, what dose or doses is ideal to give of ALN-6400 to people with HHT in the phase 2 study, okay? So again, phase 2, this is the study to further define safety done in people with the disease and identify the best dose and assess the benefits, the efficacy of the medication. It will answer questions like, is ALN-6400 safe in patients with HHT? Does it result in less bleeding compared with placebo? And if positive, how should a phase 3 trial be designed to confirm the benefit? So here are the high-level eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria are the criteria that you need to meet in order to enter the study, in order to be enrolled in the trial. So you should be age 18 or older. This is a trial for adults. You have to have a diagnosis of HHT, of course. Moderate or severe nosebleeds as based by the epistaxis severity score. Now, I want to be very clear. What people think of their nosebleeds in terms of whether they're mild, moderate, or severe is not necessarily what they actually are. And in fact, I found in taking care of over 500 families with HHT for many years that people tend to underestimate the severity of their nosebleeds because they live with them and they become used to them. So if just because you're not sure if your nosebleeds qualify as moderate or severe, that's a judgment left to your doctor, okay, and your in this case would really be the trial doctor if you come into this study. If your nosebleeds are bothering you, and or you gastrointestinal bleeding, that's a problem. That's good reason to talk to your doctor about an HHT clinical trial like this one. Iron deficiency, anemia, and or treatment with IV iron or red cell transfusions. So this is people that either are anemic or have required intravenous iron or have required red blood cell transfusion. So basically anybody who has not required only oral iron or no iron supplementation at all would meet this criterion, okay? Depending on how long it's been since you've gotten your IV iron, but those are more details that you can talk over with your doctor. Willing to complete a daily nosebleed diary. Okay, so in clinical trials, you get more attention, but you also have to do a little bit of work on your side, filling out, your daily nosebleeds in a diary. In the case of this study, filling out a diary that documents your medications the study medication that you take. If it's a pill, for example, that's not the case in this study, but just clinical trials in general often have one or more diaries associated with them. Um, uh, Agree to not undergo procedural or surgical management of nose telangiectasias or nosebleeds, except in emergency situations, of course, during the double-blind treatment period. Agree not to start new therapies for bleeding and HHT during the double-blind treatment period. Not taking what are called combined oral contraceptives, which contain estrogen, or systemic estrogen-containing hormone replacement therapy. So there's a lot of women who use birth control or contraceptives that contain only progesterone. That is fine. The problem is with estrogen. And if you are taking something with estrogen and you would like to participate in this trial, it may be very simple for you to be converted over to a birth control containing only progesterone or something that doesn't contain estrogen. Willing to comply with contraceptive requirements, which is true for every clinical trial. Not currently pregnant, planning to become pregnant, or breastfeeding. So ultimately, ALN 6400 may proceed to phase 3 and eventually to regulatory approval, right? If the phase 1 study that's ongoing is successful, the phase 2 study shows that the drug is safe and effective, and the phase 3 study shows that the drug is safe and effective. But this process takes a number of years, right? So each of these studies, you expect a phase 2 study in a disease like HHT on average to take 2, maybe 3 years, and then a phase 3 study, just from very beginning to very end, phase 3 study a little bit longer. So, it takes quite some time before this medication will be available for doctors to prescribe, which is why, again, I think it's prudent to, if you have problematic bleeding in HHT and you're interested in potentially participating in a clinical trial, a good idea to talk to your doctor about it. So in summary, ALN 6400 is an investigational therapy being developed for HHT. And a phase 2 clinical trial of ALN 6400 in people with HHT that will be opening soon, that gives eligible patients with HHT an opportunity to be part of the study. Your doctor offers you enrollment into a clinical trial as an option because they believe it may have a positive benefit risk profile for you. And personally, I offer clinical trials to my patients when I think it's the best option for them. And, I think it's important, right, to discuss all of the viable options. But it's the sort of thing that, generally speaking, doctors, including myself, don't offer the clinical trial if we don't think that's an optimal choice or the optimal choice. All participants in clinical trials are volunteers who can leave the trial at any time and for any reason. Trials are designed to understand the benefit and risk profile of a medicine. The drug development process is highly regulated, monitored, and takes many years for a medicine to reach approval. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Samkari. So we do have some questions, and anybody who is interested in asking additional questions, please type them into the Q&A box on your screen. So our first question is, would this work for GI bleeds?
That's a great question. So based on I taking a step back before we talk about would this new medicine that's in this clinical trial work for anything? It's a clinical trial, right? So we don't know until the clinical trial is done and everything is analyzed. But it, based on the mechanism of the drug, the expectation is yes. The expectation is that this would reduce GI bleeding because we know that when there's a significant reduction in this protein called plasminogen that's consistent, that's a deep reduction over a period of a long time, that reduces bleeding for the vast majority of people with bleeding at mucosal sites, okay? So people with heavy menstrual bleeding, people with gastrointestinal bleeding, people with nosebleeds, right? We don't know if that's going to be the case for people with HHT. That's why we're doing the clinical trial. And to emphasize that, but that is the hope, that is the hypothesis that, in fact, that is exactly the kind of bleeding that this drug would work for.
Fantastic. Thank you. When does this trial start?
That's a great question. So it's going to be opening in the coming months. Every site is, there's going to be multiple sites for the trial, and every site is going to open, at its own time when it's ready. And I would encourage people to, there will be an opportunity to work through Cure HHT to try to find, a site that would be optimal for you for the clinical trial. These clinical trials always have, like I said, there's so many regulatory steps and the ethics committees have to approve them and so on and so forth, but we're almost there for this study. So it should be, the phase 2 study in people with HHT should be opening in the coming months.
Okay. And is there a placebo involved?
So that's a great question. So this clinical trial is a placebo-controlled trial, but also has an open label extension. So as I described before, when there's an open label extension, it means that you are going to get randomized initially to get a certain dose of the medication or a placebo. For people who are randomized to receive a certain dose of the medication, they can continue on when the randomization period is over, the period where people don't know what their treatment assignment is, whether it's the active medicine or a placebo. After that, whether you're assigned to the active medicine or a placebo, you can continue on to receive the active medicine post-study.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
What about individuals that have either been on or are currently on Avastin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, we don't know what the I have to say that before just because again we don't have the data from the trial yet. But the way this medicine works, it shouldn't matter whether or not you were on Avastin in the past, and it shouldn't matter whether or not the Avastin worked for you in the past. This medicine works totally differently from Avastin. So this protein plasminogen that the medication reduces the levels of, that has nothing to do with Avastin. That's not a target of Avastin. Avastin works on a totally different protein, a hormone. And so when plasminogen is reduced, it reduces in people without HHT, right, in other settings, and in people with HHT taking tranexamic acid and aminocaproic acid, we know that it reduces bleeding, and it may also, because plasminogen has an effect on blood vessel growth and formation, so-called angiogenesis, it may also have a positive impact on the problems with blood vessel growth and formation that cause many of the lesions in HHT? Those are all questions that remain to be answered. But there should be no impact of previously being on Avastin that would impact on this study that we would predict. Anything is possible, which is why we do the clinical trial.
Okay. And does a patient interested in participating in this study need to be a patient of record at an HHT Center of Excellence?
No, that's a great question. If you're interested in participating in this study, you just have to go to a site that has the study open. And those presumably are going to be primarily HHT Centers of Excellence, if not exclusively HHT Centers of Excellence. But you don't have to be an established patient of them right now. You can become a patient of a HHT Center of Excellence. Sometimes people ask, oh, well, if I live really far away, can my local doctor run the study for me in my hometown? The answer is no. But most clinical trials, and every trial is different, and some of the details are still being worked out for this trial, but most clinical trials, right, offer support for people to be able to make their study visits, help with transportation if they live far away, things like that. And so it's something that is built into trials, particularly for rare diseases, where there's only going to be so many study sites around the country, around a given country, right? To help people who live far away, who are not established at big, academic centers or big HEC centers, to be able to make it to one for their study visit so they can participate in the trial just like somebody who lives close.
Okay, and kind of along those lines, we have several kind of questions related to that. And so one would be if a patient is already seen, for instance, at MGH, how would they, and you're a study site, how would they let you know that they want to participate? But then we've also had, if someone isn't at an HHT center, do they have to go through the normal like channels of getting a screening appointment and all of that at the
Mm.
center, or is there kind of a direct path to the research study?
Those are both great questions. So if you're already a patient at a site that is going to be holding a study, then that's going to be easy for you. All you got to do is talk to your HHT doctor at the site, and say, I'm interested in this study. And if the HHT doctor at the site is the person running the study, which usually they will be, then they'll tell you about it and they can get you enrolled. If they are not, then they'll send you to the doctor who is running the study at that site. So that's reasonably easy. Just reach out to your doctor and tell them that you're interested in this study. If you are at a different, if you're not an HHT center, you absolutely can take a fast track to the doctor that is running the study. You don't have to go through other HHT doctors at the HHT center first. And as I mentioned before, when the study is open and where it's open, Cure HHT is an amazing resource to help you go to the closest center to you, the right center for you, and give you the name of the study doctor so that you can make an appointment directly with them. There's also something called clinicaltrials.gov that often lists sites for studies, and that's something that may also be a tool in the future. But if you have questions, the easiest, and maybe a tool in the future to find the right site for you. But if you have questions that you're not sure where the study, where you could participate in the study, and you want to investigate it, I would recommend going through Cure HHT.
Fantastic. And we will absolutely make sure that once the study launches, there will be communications to the community and also information both on our website and, as always, available through contacting us by email or by phone. So appreciate you sharing that. So we have quite a few questions just regarding side effects and does this affect AVMs in all different organs or different types of questions. So I
It's a
guess
great question.
I know you've talked a little bit about we don't know, that's why we're going through the clinical trial. But I'm just wondering, like, are there any suspected long-term impacts of this drug or any known side effects or you
That's a
know,
great question. That's a
yeah.
great question. So the when the study is open, there will be an informed consent document that summarizes all of the potential known side effects based on that phase 1 study that's currently being done in healthy volunteers. Now, I will say that as a general statement, right, the medication that we currently use that reduces plasminogen activity that targets and inhibits plasminogen, prevents the conversion of plasminogen to plasmin, which is tranexamic acid, TXA, or aminocaproic acid. Those medications are re really difficult to take for the long term because they require a ton of pills, but they're not difficult to take because of side effects, right? So those medicines are pretty well tolerated. One question that comes up a lot is, does taking a medicine that impacts plasminogen, does that increase the risk for blood clotting? And the answer to that, based on all of the data we have using tranexamic acid and aminocaproic acid, as well as all of the data that we have in people who have congenital plasminogen deficiency, people who are born without plasminogen in any of their or very, very low levels of plasminogen in any of their organs, the answer appears to be no. So there is, a pretty wide base, both in HHT and outside of HHT, in terms of data, suggesting that inhibiting plasminogen is really well tolerated in general and is a safe thing to do. Of course, again, we don't know until we do the clinical trial, but the reason why this is felt to be a promising target is obviously because we have experience with tranexamic acid, and the idea would be, can you inhibit this protein to a much deeper level that results in more efficacy, that results in good efficacy, consistent efficacy, in a way that is much more convenient, not having to take 8 horse pills a day, right? So that's the kind of the thought. Now, you asked another question about should it be expected to impact AVMs? Well, as I said before, plasminogen is involved in the angiogenic pathway. It's an important angiogenic protein. So it is possible that considerable dropping, significant dropping of the level of plasminogen over a period of, many months or years could have a positive impact on AVMs, but we don't know, right? And I would say that's a bigger we don't know than the questions pertaining to the bleeding, because for the bleeding, we have sort of an analogous, um, other medications to look at. And we have people that have hereditary plasminogen deficiency to look at. We don't have that right in AVMs. So it's more, I would say it's more of a question, but it certainly is possible. And that is something that, I think will be a topic of interest for the studies as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. We also have a couple of questions regarding current medications that an individual is on, being Avastin or tranexamic acid, even pomalidomide.
Mhm.
Are they able to continue being on those medications, or do they need to come off of those drugs?
That's a really great question. So, for the purpose of this study, you would come off of other HHT medications prior to enrolling in the study. And, the reasons for that would be you are not getting an adequate effect from the current medicine you're on. You still have really bad nosebleeds. You still have bad gastrointestinal bleeding. You have side effects for the current medicine that you don't like, that are really problematic, and you want an effective therapy that doesn't give you those side effects, doesn't give you problematic side effects. Um, you are interested in trying a new therapy. That happens, not infrequently, where people recognize, I'm on Avastin now, it's been okay. I'd like to try something different to see if it works better, to see if it's more convenient for me. And I can always go back to the Avastin, right? If the trial doesn't work out for me, because I can get the Avastin outside of the trial, right? So that is also an option. So there are a lot of different reasons, but again, that's why I said earlier, it's important to talk to your doctor to understand, and communicate your thoughts and your desires and your priorities, so that they can help you make the right choice for you.
Great, thank you. And I think like the key there is to contact the recruiting site and talk to them about your current line of treatment and what your options are. Um,
Absolutely.
so I have someone asking if there is an upper limit on age to participate in the study.
No.
Okay. Um, and this is a pill medication. That is how.
This is a subcutaneous injection. So like
Okay.
what does that mean? So if you've ever seen anybody, get a tuberculosis test, that's a subcutaneous little shot under the skin. If you've ever seen anybody get insulin or, Ozempic or any of these like pen medications that people inject, at home, that's an example of subcutaneous medication. Right now, there aren't any other subcutaneous medications that we typically use in HHT, so it's not an HHT medicine that I can explicitly point out to you, that's subcutaneous. But it's a tiny amount of fluid, and it's not in a vein. Subcutaneous means under the skin, so it's just directly under the skin. It's a tiny little pinch when the tiny little needle goes under the skin and injects the medicine. So it's a very, very small amount. And it's not something that you would need to, sit in an infusion chair for hours to receive or something like that. It takes a few seconds to administer. This medicine, on the setting of a clinical trial, right, be administered in the clinic at the site where you are enrolled on the trial if you enroll. And
Okay.
it's one
And
subcutaneous injection every 3 months.
okay, that was the next question is what is the regimen?
Yeah,
Okay.
one subcutaneous injection every 3 months. So, right, that is really potentially convenient, right? That's especially when kind of compared to or you consider you know how many pills you have to take a day of tranexamic acid and every 6 to 8 hours and things like that. So, yes, it is it's a very potentially convenient regimen.
Okay. And is there uh is there any travel uh reimbursement or stipends for people that are traveling like to a site that is outside of their area?
Yeah, so um, that is something that is often offered as part of clinical trials, and I can't, right now this trial is not open yet, right? So there's still possible changes, and different countries and different institutional ethics boards may have different policies regarding whether they allow that kind of thing. I personally think it's obviously should always be allowed. At our site, it's certainly allowed. So I can't give an answer to that question that is going to be 100% necessarily accurate depending on where you are. But I can say that it is typical. I can say that that is certainly part of the plan, but it is not necessarily it's a good question for your study doctor ultimately when you go to the site. But generally speaking, with these kinds of trials, unless the country or the institution doesn't allow it, that is pretty typical. Reimbursement for travel, for hotel, for food while traveling, things like that. There's always rules around it. But the idea here is to make things available to people regardless of where they live. We want uh, uh, people, even who live in smaller towns or far away from centers, to have the availability, to have the opportunity. I serve on my institutional's my institution's ethics board, right? I don't review my own studies or the studies that I run, right? Those are reviewed by other people, but I review other people's studies. And one of the things that comes up a lot is we think it's really important. My ethics board that I'm part of thinks it's really important for studies to offer reimbursements whenever possible. So government studies, which tend to be run with much more limited budgets, often don't offer those reimbursements, or they don't offer, sometimes they don't even cover the drug. But most industry studies, and this is an industry study, it's common now for that to be the case. And every study going through my ethics board, we always say you should reimburse the patient for their travel expenses. This is not a means to make anybody wealthy, right? This is a means to take some of the financial consideration, in large part, take most of the financial considerations out. Clinical trials still require time, and that maybe time you take off work and such to come to visits, but at least we can help equalize or neutralize the barriers that come into play in terms of distance from the site and financial ability.
Okay, thank you. Does this medicine have any contraindications?
So in general, right, so this is a medicine in a clinical trial. In general, any contraindications or perceived possible contraindications are addressed by those eligibility criteria to enter the study. So you won't be eligible for the trial if you have a contraindication to it that we are aware of, right? But it's always possible, right, that we could learn additional things over the course of the study. And so that's one of the reasons why we do studies. But for what we know now, the expectation is that if you have if you have a known contraindication, you won't be enrolled.
Okay, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say our last question is, I have a couple people asking, how long will this trial last?
Until it's full. So that's always a question. Most clinical trials run for a period of several months before they fill, of this size. Some clinical trials are really, really huge and they take a lot longer. But of this size, I think you could probably measure the time. Depends on the number of sites. And how about this? I'll give a experience with prior studies in HHT. So the last study in HHT that was an industry study that we opened it in November, and it was full by May. So that kind of gives you the sense. That filled faster than expected because there were a lot of people that were interested in participating. So I would say that if you are interested, it doesn't hurt to reach out early, even if you decide you don't want to enroll right then, or you maybe want to enroll later, or you change your mind and don't want to enroll at all. Knowledge is power. So I think it's a good idea to know what the options are, know when when a site near you is enrolling, or a site that you can travel to is enrolling, to really reach out and be established, so that the doctor at that site who knows how close the study is to filling, they can give you more specific answers on that.
Okay, thank you so much. I know that we had some additional questions, but our time is up for the evening, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact Cure HHT at 410-357-9932, or you can email research@curehht.org. And that information is also in the chat for everyone to view. And as soon as we have any information on the launch of any recruiting sites for this study, we will be making announcements out to the community to let you know where those sites exist, and we will be updating our website. So on behalf of everyone at Cure HHT, I just want to thank you for attending tonight's webinar and for staying connected to us. I also really want to thank our partners who are conducting this clinical trial to advance research for Cure HHT, as well as the patients yourselves who are interested in, uh, you know, participating in research, because without you, we can't advance these potential therapies for the community at large. And so we really hope that you enjoyed tonight's programming, that you learned enough information to be curious and want to learn more. And we are here to answer any questions that you might have. Again, I want to thank Dr. Hanny Al-Samkari for his time tonight. And to remind you that this program was recorded and will be posted on our website in the coming days to weeks, as soon as we're able to do that. We truly appreciate your participation, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and seeing you soon, hopefully in Dallas, Texas on November 8th and 9th at the National HHT Patient Conference. So, and have a good evening, everyone.